everybody, so welcome to the final 2 weeks of our class, and in this short video I want to explain the big picture of what we're going to be doing as we finish out 8 weeks looking at world history. Whew, it's a whirlwind, and we're going to cover a massive time period here, and so it's very much, the lens is brought out so we could see a big panoramic picture of what's occurring and major trends and ideas and shaping of new identities from a larger picture. So 4 things we're going to be doing in these last 2 weeks. First and foremost, you're going to be looking at how, in general, empires that emerge and become great, and during that time, seems like they're never going to end. People in any empire will tell you this is the most powerful empire. It's different than every other empire that's ever come about, and it's going to last forever, and they never do, and they eventually start to crumble and to collapse, and out of their ashes and out of their rubble emerges something new and restructure themselves into new empires, new identities, still having an echo of, but more of a toothless smile of what they were before. And so they become something new. Rome is a great example. Rome, everybody in the Roman Empire never thought that it was going to crumble, was going to end, it was going to last forever. This was, of course, Rome. It was the buildings, the structure, the language, the identities were just spreading across the Mediterranean. Remember, this was the whole sea that they called was their sea, Mare Nostrum. It was their place, it was their sea, and it was always going to be that way for generation after generation. It remained Rome. But then what happens, 4th century, finally things start to spread so much and start to crumble within in different directions that they just can't hold on to it. So they move their center from Rome further east where all the action is. Constantine makes this new city, Constantinople, and it's closer to the whole Silk Road. It's closer to trade to the east, to India, to Africa, to Northern Europe, to everywhere, and it seems to be the new center of the world for them. And but eventually even that restructures and collapses in its own way. So what happens when an empire falls? And Rome's going to be our example of how we're going to see 3 new emergence of empires, really perhaps more accurately than empire is worlds. Worlds have identities to them. They have a world view. They have a way of thinking. They have a cultural connection to them, and so perhaps that's more accurate, but regardless, we're going to see 3 of those coming about with the fall of Rome. And so if you picture in your mind the Mediterranean, and you can see which was once all the Roman Empire, we're going to see 3 emerge. First, we're going to see Byzantium, which was the last stand of the Roman Empire, at the center of that, Constantinople, which is now modern day Turkey, which is now called modern day, it's Istanbul. But to the Greek Orthodox world, to the Orthodox Christianity, that is still Constantinople, because that was the heartbeat of that Constantine of the Orthodox faith church identity. And so the Byzantine Empire that emerges in that Eastern Roman world takes shape and creates new identities we still see today in the Greek Orthodox world, Russian Orthodox world, and really controlled much of that Mediterranean world, and even into the modern day Middle East and modern day Kiev, so what is now Ukraine. You see a connection between that and there, all the way up to Rome, and also, or to Russia, and also with what is now what we think of as the Viking world. That trade network and world system of exchange was very strong in the Middle Ages, if we want to have a term to it. If you look further west, what becomes Western Christendom, that in our mind is what we think of the Middle Ages, with knights, specific knights, when we think of what's happening in France and what's in England and the rise of these new city-states and these new identities of countries emerging, and fights with France, when Germany, and at the hub of that, Christianity based in Rome, which is now what we think of the Catholic Church, which means universal church. So we have Catholicism, the Catholic Church, and the medieval world of the West on one side, and you have Byzantium and this Byzantine medieval world on the other side, both interacting and creating new identities within them. Then you have in the middle of the Arabian Desert and what we now call the Middle East, a new emergence of a new identity comes out of the center of all trade. If we think of the Silk Road that was happening and the trade that was happening from there to the Mediterranean, down to India, to China, to Africa, to Eastern Europe, to the Mediterranean, and to Western Europe, out of that center hub in the Arabian Peninsula, in a center spot of Mecca, which was a trade network of all people coming together who were safe to trade, had to put their weapons aside, there was this place where everyone could worship called the Kaaba, where every image of any gods and religions, even Plato and Aristotle had something in there, so old, Greek mythology and ideas and philosophy, Zoroastrianism was there, and Jewish people were there, able to be there. Christians were there. Everybody was there, being able to worship in freedom. Then comes this man, Muhammad, who changes everything, kicks out those idols and restructures the region under one. With the idea that there's no God but one God, and Muhammad is the messenger, and those followers become known as Muslims, those who submit to God, and Islam emerges. It spreads incredibly quickly across the Middle East, what we call the Middle East, across the Arabian Peninsula, across North Africa, further east up into India and Afghanistan, and all the way across the Silk Road, if you want to think of it that direction, and then further west, well into Spain, creating what is known in the medieval world Al-Andalus, medieval Islamic Spain, which is a fantastic place to study in itself, a place where Jews, Christians, and Muslims were working and living in a world together. And you can see that in the architecture. You can see a very Islamic world architecture, but with Hebrew writing on it and Christian writing in it, and just some very interesting interaction happening. But all three of those worlds, Western Europe, Byzantine, and Islamic world, reshapes the Mediterranean, reshapes that part of the world that then spread to the rest of the world and how we know the world today. So the Islamic faith follows across the whole world, Catholicism breaks down into Protestant Reformations, and then that breaks into two different religious directions. Same with the Byzantine world. And in 1453, we see that Constantinople crumbles, falls, and becomes Istanbul. So again, empires are always restructuring, reemerging as something new. So in this class, we're not going to cover details of all these things, but that's the basic gist of what you're going to be seeing. You're going to see how empires emerge. When they crumble, something happens. For us, when the Roman Empire starts to crumble, we see three massive new worlds emerge: Western Christendom, Byzantium, and the Islamic world. So for this week number 7, you're going to be able to see two of those. So you're going to look at Byzantium and Western Christendom, over a big overview of those. And then our final week, you're going to look at the Islamic world. Now, one thing to kind of take away from the Islamic world, we would never have the Renaissance. If you think of what happened in especially Western Christendom in the 15th, 16th, 17th centuries with the Renaissance and even the scientific revolution, those would never have happened if it wasn't for what was happening centuries before in the Islamic world. They had what was called, and you're going to read about, the translation movement. And this was a fantastic thing where across the Islamic world, they had intellectuals who were both speaking Islam or speaking Arabic and speaking Hebrew and speaking Greek and speaking Latin, and able to translate classical texts and spread them and diffuse this knowledge across the Islamic world that eventually made its way into Western Europe. And that knowledge became the foundation of the reemergence of classical writing. That's what Renaissance means, the rebirth, and it becomes the foundation of the Renaissance itself. So again, going back to world systems of exchange of good, people, ideas, and disease, that's happening in the Islamic world. Now, we're also going to see with the Byzantine Empire, one emperor, most powerful empire in the Byzantine Empire, is Justinian, who makes this beautiful Hagia Sophia, which is still in Istanbul today. But during his reign was a massive plague, a massive death called the Justinian plague that started in the east and spread its way and eventually to the Mediterranean and eventually into parts of Europe, all because of that interaction. And it's a massive plague that hit and struck and is written about in all cultures of that world. Now, fast forward to 1348, it's going to happen again with the Black Death. And then fast forward to modern day 2019, 2020, when we have the COVID world pandemic. There's a lot of echoes of what happened with Justinian's plague, with the Black Death, and how the interaction of people will always be ideas, goods, people, and disease, no matter what time in history we're talking about. So there's a lot of continuities that happen in our class that we still see today, and perhaps the biggest one is the formation of identities, and how identities you're going to see coming about with Western Christendom, Byzantium, the Islamic world are very much part of our world in the 21st century.